When humanity goes mad. When humanity goes mad, the forces beyond the galaxy begin to tremble. Civilizations that once ruled the stars now whisper warnings in the dark. The ancients, the conquerors, and even the gods themselves watch with unease. Because there is one truth that all have come to learn: when humans abandon reason, they do not seek victory, they seek extinction. Ambassador Growthhack of the Galactic Union sat in the negotiation chamber, his gaze fixed on the massive display showing Earth slowly rotating in the void. In his centuries of life, he had seen empires rise and fall, but nothing had ever terrified him as much as this. Across the table, General Vasily Orlov of the United Earth Federation met his gaze with an expression as cold as the void itself. "You already know our decision," Orlov said, his voice steady, unyielding. Grothack took a slow breath through his biological filter mask. "You truly mean to defy the entire Galactic Union? You have no chance." Orlov didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached forward and activated the holographic display. Images flashed before them, colossal Union warships reduced to debris, drifting lifeless in the abyss, an entire Zolari homeworld once thought to be impenetrable, now nothing more than a field of burning wreckage. Grothack's reptilian pupils constricted. Impossible. The Zolari had defenses that no known force could breach. Orlov smiled, just a small, chilling curve of his lips. No known force, yes, but humans, we have no limits when we decide they no longer exist. A cold dread settled into Grothack's bones. The Galactic Union had long understood that humans were dangerous, but they had always held on to their morals, their restraint. However, when pushed too far, "I pray to the gods of the cosmos," Grothack whispered, "because you are about to witness the wrath of mankind." Grothack's claws tapped anxiously against the table. His species, the Jarkai, were warriors, forged in the fires of 1,000 wars, but even they had learned to fear the madness of humanity. "You think you can survive against us?" he asked, his voice lower now, as if he were speaking to a force beyond his understanding. Orlov leaned forward, eyes sharp like a predator that had just scented blood. "Survive?" he repeated, almost amused. "Ambassador, you don't understand. We are not trying to survive." The room fell into silence. "Then what are you trying to do?" Grothack finally asked, his throat dry. Orlov exhaled slowly, as if savoring the moment before speaking. "We are making sure that if we go down, we are taking every last one of you with us." A shiver ran through Grothack's spine. He could see it in the human's eyes. There was no bluff, no hesitation. It was pure, calculated resolve. He glanced at the images again. The Zolari were one of the most powerful races in the galaxy, yet their homeworld had been turned to ash. How? No one knew. The Union had expected humanity to kneel after their defeat at Vega 7. Instead, the humans had vanished for 3 years and returned as something else entirely. The first retaliation was a single silent strike, an entire Union dreadnought fleet reduced to drifting corpses. The second was the obliteration of the Zolari stronghold, and now, this. Grothack clenched his fists. "If you do this, there will be no future for your kind." Orlov simply smiled. "That's where you're wrong, Ambassador." The chamber doors slid open, revealing a squad of heavily armored soldiers, their visors glowing red. Behind them, an eerie hum vibrated through the air, like the whisper of a storm about to break. Grothack's breath caught. He could feel it now. That unnatural energy, something even the Zarkai had no words for. Humanity had not just gone mad, they had become something far, far worse. Grothack instinctively reached for the energy blade at his side, but his fingers froze. It was useless. He knew that now. The soldiers stepped forward, moving with an eerie, unnatural synchronicity. Their armor was unlike anything Grothack had ever seen, black, almost liquid, shifting like a living organism. It wasn't metal, it wasn't technology, it was something else. Orlov stood slowly. "Do you feel it, Ambassador?" His voice was quiet, almost reverent. "The change?" Grothack swallowed hard. What? What have you done?" Orlov's smile widened. "We stopped fighting like the rest of you." He gestured toward the soldiers. "We stopped thinking about survival. We embraced what we truly are." A sharp, grating sound filled the air as one of the soldiers reached up and removed their helmet. Grothack's mind screamed in protest. The face beneath was wrong, not human, not alien, but something that should not exist. The eyes were pits of shifting darkness, swirling with raw, chaotic energy. "You thought we would break," Orlov continued, stepping toward him. That we would surrender, kneel before your so-called superior civilizations. His voice dropped to a whisper. But we are not like you. The chamber trembled as the very walls seemed to vibrate. Grothak's vision blurred, and for the first time in centuries, he felt true fear. What, what is this power? He gasped. Orlov placed a firm hand on his shoulder, leaning in. Something you could never understand. Something born not from conquest, nor technology, nor evolution. His grip tightened. It is born from rage. Grothak barely had time to react before the lights dimmed, and the last thing he saw was the shadow of humanity's wrath descending upon the galaxy. Grothak's vision swam as the oppressive force tightened around him. The shadows pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, like the heartbeat of some slumbering cosmic horror just beginning to stir. He could feel something ancient in the air, something that had no place in the orderly cosmos the Galactic Union had built. His voice trembled. This is not technology. Orlov knelt beside him, eyes glinting with something between triumph and madness. No, Ambassador, this is evolution. Grothak's mind recoiled at the word. Evolution was meant to be gradual, a slow march toward refinement. But this was something else entirely. This was a leap into the abyss, a descent into madness so complete that even reason had been left behind. The soldier who had removed his helmet stepped forward. His face, if it could still be called that, continued to shift, flickering between features Grothak recognized and others that were utterly alien. We have become what your kind could never comprehend. Grothak gritted his teeth. You are monsters. Orlov chuckled, standing to his full height. Perhaps, but tell me, Ambassador, what do you call a monster that even the gods fear? The room trembled violently. The shadows began to crawl up the walls, slithering like hungry serpents. In the distance, Grothak heard something whispering, not in words, but in pure, raw intent. Destruction, hunger, extinction. Then, the doors to the chamber burst open. A group of Galactic Union enforcers stormed in, weapons raised, their armor gleaming under the dim, flickering light. Ambassador, their commander barked. Step away from them. Grothak turned his head slowly, barely able to comprehend what was happening. No, you must run. But it was too late. Orlov simply raised a hand. The enforcers had no time to scream. The shadows surged forward like a tidal wave, swallowing them whole. Their armor shattered like brittle glass, their bodies twisted, pulled into the abyss as something ancient and nameless devoured them. When the darkness retreated, nothing remained. No bodies, no weapons, not even dust. Grothak stared in horror. Orlov sighed, almost bored. That was disappointing. He turned back to the ambassador, his smile widening. Now, where were we? Grothak's body refused to move. His mind screamed at him to run, to fight, to do something, but all he could do was watch as Orlov stepped closer. The darkness in the chamber pulsed, alive, sentient. It was not just an absence of light. It was something hungry. The walls of the room warped, shifting like they were caught between dimensions, struggling to contain the force that had been unleashed. Orlov tilted his head. You see now, don't you? His voice was almost gentle. This isn't war. This isn't conquest. This is the breaking of an old order and the birth of something new. Grothak swallowed, forcing himself to speak. You think the Union will let this stand? His voice was hoarse, but he clung to the thought. They will send everything they have, every fleet, every weapon. They will burn Earth to the ground. Orlov smirked. Let them come. The shadows behind him twisted, forming shapes, jagged, monstrous, towering figures that had no place in reality. Their eyes glowed like dying stars, filled with a void that devoured light itself. You still don't understand, Orlov continued, stepping past the wreckage of the enforcers. Earth is not where this ends. Earth was only the beginning. Grothak's heart pounded. You're lying. Orlov simply raised a hand. The massive screen behind him flickered to life, showing a live feed of the Galactic Union's central fleet. The most powerful armada ever assembled. Hundreds of battleships, dreadnoughts, carriers, all gathered near the Union homeworld. Then, without warning, the stars around them blinked out. Grothak's breath caught in his throat. One by one, the ships vanished. Not destroyed, not exploded, but erased, pulled into the abyss like they had never existed. The cosmic void itself swallowed them whole. The feed cut to static. Orlov turned back to him, his smile wider now, his eyes gleaming with something inhuman. The gods are dead, Ambassador. He gestured to the shadows around him. And now humanity decides what comes next. The darkness surged forward. Grothak's screams were the last sound before silence swallowed the chamber whole. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, as if reality itself was holding its breath. The chamber where Grothak had once stood was gone, consumed. Not a trace of him remained. Orlov exhaled slowly, turning his gaze toward the void where the ambassador had vanished. There was no satisfaction in his expression, no triumph, only inevitability. A voice slithered through the shadows, layered and ancient. The old order crumbles, Orlov nodded, as it should. The flickering screen behind him changed again, shifting through distorted signals, galactic distress calls, frantic warnings, desperate prayers from civilizations that had once seen humanity as insignificant. Now they knew better. A transmission broke through the interference. A familiar face appeared, High Chancellor Velk of the Galactic Union, his normally composed reptilian features marred by fear. "This is madness, General," Velk hissed, his voice trembling. "You are dooming not just your species, but the entire galaxy." Orlov leaned forward slightly, his gaze calm. "No, Chancellor." He clasped his hands behind his back. "We are simply removing those who stood in the way of something greater." Velk's scales darkened in distress. "You cannot control this power. You don't even understand what you've unleashed." Orlov smirked. "You're mistaken. We understand perfectly." The shadows coiled tighter around him, responding to his presence. They were not tools. They were not weapons. They were an extension of humanity itself. A second voice cut through the transmission, a panicked admiral. "Chancellor! The rift is expanding, our fleets!" The signal fractured into screams before collapsing into static. Velk's eyes widened. "By the gods." Orlov chuckled, a low, dark sound. "Your gods are gone, Chancellor." His voice was quiet, almost pitying. "And we are what remains." The screen flickered one last time, then erased itself from existence. Orlov turned, stepping toward the massive viewport overlooking Earth. But it was no longer the same world. The skies churned with dark storms, arcs of unnatural lightning dancing between the clouds. And above it, silhouetted against the abyss, the first of the new warfleets emerged. No steel, no engines, only shifting, living forms, pulsing with the same darkness that had consumed the Union's fleets. Orlov smiled. The age of humanity was over. The age of something beyond had begun. The warfleets drifted into formation, their shifting, living hulls pulsing like the organs of some vast cosmic entity. They were neither ships nor machines. They were something new. Something that defied classification, existing between matter and shadow, between physics and the unknown. Orlov watched them with quiet reverence. A voice, deep and resonant, echoed in his mind. "The veil is thinning." He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the pulse of the new order vibrating through his very bones. Yes, it is time. The darkness had whispered to them in humanity's most desperate hour, offering salvation not through peace nor through surrender, but through transformation. And humanity had accepted. A soft chime broke his thoughts, a final incoming transmission. The remnants of the Galactic Union, their council gathered in what was left of their command station. Their faces were drawn, their postures rigid. Fear clung to them like a dying ember in a starless night. The speaker, a weary-looking avian elder, cleared his throat. "General Orlov," his voice was hoarse. We surrender." Orlov tilted his head, amused. "Surrender?" He glanced at the writhing warfleets above Earth, at the vast rift in space where entire systems had vanished without a trace. "Do you think this is still a war?" The avian's feathers trembled. "Please, we will give you anything. Resources, territories, anything you wish." Orlov sighed, almost disappointed. "Chancellor Grothak once said something to me." His voice was soft. "He prayed to the gods for mercy." He leaned closer to the screen, and I told him the truth. The shadows behind him rippled, the very fabric of reality bending to his will. "The gods are dead." The council's image shattered, as did the station they sat in, consumed in an instant, erased from the fabric of the cosmos. Orlov exhaled, turning his gaze to the infinite abyss beyond. This was no longer about humanity. This was the birth of something new, and the galaxy would tremble before it. The void hummed with unseen forces, reality itself warping at the edges as the transformation reached its peak. The warfleets above Earth pulsed like massive, slumbering titans, their very existence bending the laws of the universe. Orlov stood at the edge of the command deck, gazing into the abyss. He could feel it now, something far greater than himself, greater than humanity, stirring in the darkness. It was watching. A voice, neither male nor female, whispered from the void. The cycle is broken. Orlov's lips curled into a faint smile. Yes, we have broken it. For eons, civilizations had risen and fallen, repeating the same patterns: war, diplomacy, stagnation, decay. The Galactic Union had believed itself to be the pinnacle of order. The gods of old had whispered that their way was the only way, but humanity had shown them the truth. The cycle was a lie. A deep, resonant pulse rippled through space as if the very fabric of existence was inhaling before something vast and unfathomable emerged. The largest of the new warfleets moved, its form shifting like liquid shadow, yet denser than any metal. Its hull was not built, it had grown. It was not powered, it hungered. A single thought echoed through Orlov's mind. It is time. With a slow, deliberate motion, he raised his hand. The warfleets responded instantly. Across the void, the great vessels twisted, forming impossible geometries that defied space and logic. The shadows thickened, spiraling outward, devouring light, matter, and even time itself. The Galactic Union's core worlds were already lost, swallowed without resistance. Their fleets, their fortresses, their rulers, gone. Now the final act would begin. The stars themselves would bow before this new order. Orlov exhaled, his voice barely above a whisper. Let the galaxy burn. And with a final gesture, the warfleets moved, plunging into the abyss, carrying the unstoppable will of the new humanity. The age of mortals had ended. The age of something greater had begun. The void trembled. Across the dying stars of the known galaxy, the last remnants of resistance faltered. Once proud empires, civilizations that had stood for millennia, whispered their final prayers into the abyss, only to hear nothing in return. There were no gods left to save them. The great warfleets moved like specters of annihilation, their very presence distorting space. They did not fire weapons. They did not launch missiles. They simply existed, and where they passed, existence itself unraveled. Orlov stood at the helm of the flagship, if it could even be called that anymore. The vessel was no longer a construct of steel and circuits, but an extension of will, of purpose. It breathed around him, pulsating in sync with the darkness beyond. He reached out, feeling the last bastions of the old galaxy clinging to their fragile realities. A distant world, a Union sanctuary, hidden deep within the remnants of a shattered nebula, blinked into his awareness. The last of their rulers, their scholars, their soldiers, all gathered in one final, desperate attempt to outlast the inevitable. He almost admired their resolve. Almost. A thought, nothing more, slipped from his mind into the void. The warfleets responded instantly. The darkness surged forward, tendrils of unbeing spiraling out from the abyss. The sanctuary world did not burn. It did not explode. It did not even crumble. It simply ceased. One moment it was there, the next it was not. Orlov exhaled. A silence settled over the bridge, not of absence, but of completion. The galaxy was no longer a battlefield. It was no longer a stage for war and peace, for treaties and betrayals. It was theirs. No more wars, no more rulers, no more pretenders to power, only the endless horizon of the void. Orlov turned his gaze outward, past the ruined husk of the known universe, toward the great, yawning emptiness beyond. And in that darkness, something called to him, something vast, something that had always been waiting. His lips curled into a quiet smile. There is still more. The warfleets, the shadows, the new humanity. They turned as one, their eyes set upon the final frontier, the universe itself. And for the first time since creation, the void feared. The abyss watched. And for the first time in eternity, it hesitated. Orlov could feel it, the pulse of the infinite, the vast, unknowable expanse beyond all things. It had always been there, lurking beyond the veil of reality, unseen, untouched. But now it was no longer alone. Humanity had stepped beyond the threshold. The warfleets drifted in silence, no longer mere ships, no longer bound by the limits of matter and time. They were extensions of the new will of a species that had torn itself free from the chains of the old order. Orlov reached out, and the void shuddered. Something was waiting in the great beyond. Something that had never been challenged, never been hunted, never been threatened, until now. A ripple passed through the endless darkness, and from it shapes began to emerge. Colossal, ancient things, their forms shifting in ways that defied comprehension. They had no names, no titles, for they had never needed them. They were the architects of the old cosmos, the unseen hands that had shaped the stars, written the laws of existence itself, and now for the first time they turned their gaze toward an intruder. A voice, vast and eternal, whispered through the void, "You do not belong here." Orlov smiled. "Neither did you." The warfleets moved, their forms unraveling and reshaping, no longer bound by the physics of lesser beings. The darkness that had once consumed empires now surged forward, not as a weapon, but as a force of pure will. The first of the ancient titans recoiled. For the first time in an existence spanning eons, it knew uncertainty. Orlov took a step forward, though there was no ground beneath him. Space itself bent at his presence. "You shaped the universe in your image," he said. "You dictated its rules, its limits." His smile widened, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But you never expected us." The warfleet struck. The first of the ancients let out a sound, not a roar, not a scream, but something deeper, more fundamental, a sound of disbelief. For the first time, the gods of the old universe felt fear. The abyss convulsed. The first of the ancient ones writhed as the darkness of the new humanity touched it, seeping into its vast, incomprehensible form. It had existed before time, before the stars, before thought itself, and yet it could not stop what was coming. The warfleets twisted, their forms unmaking and remaking themselves in an instant, adapting, evolving, becoming something even greater with every passing moment. They were no longer ships, no longer constructs of war. They were the purest expression of will, the will to conquer the infinite. The ancient being shuddered, trying to retreat, but there was nowhere to go. Orlov raised his hand. The darkness responded. The first god fell, not in battle, not in flame, not in ruin. It simply ceased to be. The echoes of its final thoughts rippled across the void, disbelief, terror, the realization that it was not omnipotent, that something greater had come. The remaining ancients stirred. They had never moved before, never acted, because they had never needed to. Until now. Orlov exhaled, the abyss itself bending around him. He gazed into the vast emptiness ahead, where the last of the ancient ones waited. Waiting, not as rulers, not as gods, but as prey. He turned to his fleet, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried across the void like the tolling of a funeral bell. "We hunt," and the warfleet surged forward, plunging into the great beyond. End of part 1.